Hi, I'm David Petersen, the creator of MouseGuard, and welcome to Creator Commentary for the third series of MouseGuard, The Black Axe. This episode will cover Issue 4, or Chapter 4, when it was collected into a hardcover edition. This commentary will not have the book's visuals. Please feel free to follow along in your copy of the story, either in issue form or from the hardcover, as I talk about the behind-the-scenes details, art notes, and my headspace, as I go page by page and panel by panel. Also, a fair warning, there will be lots of spoilers if you have not yet read this volume or the rest of the MouseGuard series. The file for the first page of this issue is dated August of 2011. In my outline for the series, it was known as the Fox issue, as the main goal for this chapter was to have an epic creature battle with a fox that lasted the whole issue. However, when I came to writing the issue, I needed more story and framing for that fight, so it's far less than the entire issue. Another goal for the issue was to have Conrad lose his leg in order to sync up with his peg leg he has in the fall series. And of course, to have Conrad lose his leg, I had to have him reappear, since he was lost in the shipwreck at the end of issue 2 of Black Axe. Here's the original solicitation text Archaea used to promote this issue of the comic. Leaving the fate of M and the Weasel King of Ilder's paws, Kellenaw trudges into the briar lair of a murderous fox. The Black Axe, a weapon forged by Farrer and now wielded by his youngest heir, is put to the test. That one lone mouse can slay the red-furred villain, which has claimed enough ferret lives to have the King of Ilder afraid to send his own kin after it. The uneven, brutal battle has an only more brutal end. Cover. I seem to remember being on a family vacation in Ludington, Michigan when I had to draw this cover, but checking the dates on the files, I did this cover in the early part of 2011, between January and February, and I wouldn't have been in Ludington at that time. This cover is like the cover from Winter issue 4, where everything is really going on the front side, and the back side is just more and more texture, detail, and pattern. This is the last cover I inked for MouseGuard with a Uniball Vision pen. I'd already switched to Copic multiliners for the interiors, but as covers are done so much earlier than in the interiors, I'd already finished this cover before the switch. The ensnaring vines were going to be a major part of the issue, so I was working on a way to help me color that tangled mess, and I came up with a way, when flatting the colors, to use garish colors to keep track of them all. After they were flatted, I could easily switch them to a more MouseGuardish palette, and the thorns are on a separate layer, set to a screen mode to lighten whatever the color of the vine is underneath them, meaning that they fade away as they recede into the darker places. Inside front cover. The visuals for this intro text were based on Folio 5R, the canon tables in the Book of Kells. With this issue being all about combat, I themed the inside front cover to tell a story of the legend of the Black Axe slaying 4 legendary predators: Wolf, Lupus, Hawk, Boto, Fox, Vulpes, and Snake, Serpentis. The vertical borders echo various fur and feather and scale patterns, and below the round areas shift like phases of the moon. Since each predator took 7 suns, or 1 week, the entire skirmish took a month, or 1 phase of the moon. Page 1. This issue picks up the color palette from the end of issue 3, but the color story definitely changes as the issue goes on. The entire page's narration reinforces the idea that the Guard don't hunt larger predators. Avoidance is more a key tactic for them, something established in their role-playing game, and something that I had to remind any of the companies that approached me about video games back at the time. There are 3 different sizes of Kellenaw on this page. In panel 1, he's tiny. Panel 2 is the hero shot, the close-up where we see how cut and scratched he is and his gear is. And in panel 3, we go to something small, to show the scale of the thicket, but also while making it relatable to our mouse. The layouts for these pages were basically me drawing Kellenaw and then a few lines to show the angles of any briar vines he might be contacting. All the rest of the drawing of the thicket were basically figured out as I inked them on the page. Page 2, Panel 1. Both to isolate Kellenaw and to connect him, I used this dialogue about M and star navigation. He is so alone and removed from everything in this thicket, he cannot even see the sky above. But he also thinks to his newly found kin and her skills, an emotional tethering. I went with an up angle here just to make sure that in this series of repetitive panels of Kellinaw surrounded by thorny vines, I was keeping the visuals interesting. Panel 2. Like Kellinaw's broken ribs at the start of the last issue, this is a writing trick to get the audience worried for Kellinaw, that the deck is really stacked against him. He's not at his best. He's suffering. And he hasn't even encountered his next challenge. However, I never show Kellinaw eat to satisfy this hunger in any reasonable time frame. I simply use the hunger for effect, and then I ignore it. Panel 3. In these dark panels, I had to be careful about the placement of the axe itself, otherwise it would get visually lost. So I often had it overlap Kellinaw, or have the head of the axe over a very wide piece of thicket, like it is here. Panel 4. The tiny cuts are me doing more of stacking on the liability. Even Kellinaw's own blood that he's losing by navigating this briar is a way for him to be more trackable by the fox. I also liked the idea of putting those slices on his cloak, something I did my best to make permanent, although I did miss drawing them in a few panels. It's even more a symbol of Kellinaw losing his old life as a guard and becoming something new. Page 3, panels 1 through 5. This came out of a story Emily Bastian told me. Her brother had been watching their chickens when she and Jeremy were out of town at a convention. They'd had some predator break-ins to the coop, so he was on the watch for something, and literally watched a mink do this, dig a hole under the coop door, then wait until a chicken came down nearby. Unfortunately for that weasel, Emily's brother was also there quietly watching with a shovel at hand. But that event inspired Kellinaw's plan here in these panels. I went with the prey fowl being pheasant because of the red hood and colorful markings. I knew they would stand out even in a flashback tint. Panel 6. I like to think that this little dirt nest of Kellinaw's also perhaps gave him a tiny chance to nap between here and the next page when morning comes. Page 4, panel 1. Fog. Just like the gimmick issue of Fall with the Rain, I wanted to play with the gimmick of fog. Up the suspense level of the scene, and switch out the visuals for a bit, with the blank unknown hanging in the air. But this also marks the start of a new color phase of the story. We went from dark muted purples to light blue grays. It also means that all the line work is color held. Where I digitally paint over the inks with a color other than black, technically I do 2 color holds, one for Kellinaw in the foreground, and then another for any fading background elements. Panel 2. I remember feeling really weird about these pages as I started, because I was barely drawing anything. Going from those very dense pages of twisted briar inks with texture to these panels where I abbreviated every outer contour, it felt like cheating. I was really worried if these pages would work even when they were colored. Page 5, panel 1. With these panels being so repetitive in terms of the character acting, Kellinaw wandering around on guard, I tried doing things in this panel, like where Kellinaw's cloak is getting snagged. Just a bit of something to entertain me as I drew, but also hopefully to keep the reader from getting bored. Panel 2. In panels 1 and 3, Kellinaw is on the left side of those panels. For this panel, I not only changed his scale for visual interest, but also shifted him to the left so that his position alternates as you read through these panels. Panel 3. And now, in the fog, Kellinaw is so lost he can't even find his way back to his burrow, which means he probably also couldn't find his way out of the briar at all if he wanted to. Panel 4. With all the fog, I had a much easier time getting the axe to show up. So in these pages, I tended not to have it overlap Kellinaw, and instead be against the background openness. Having Kellinaw climb up in this panel, a vertical one to help show the climb, was written so that he could get a better view, but mostly to position him for a rather scary cinematic moment on the next page. Page 6, panel 1. For this page, I almost went with a full splash, just one big panel for the reveal of the fox. I wanted to show the fox in whole and, in turn, show the scale to the tiny size of Kellinaw. I also liked the juxtaposition of a huge panel with only a 2-word narration. I froze. For drawing the fox, I used reference, but it looks like I chopped it up in Photoshop to reposition its head. I still remember feeling like I somehow wasn't doing enough work on these pages because of the foggy background. All that white space in the inks made it feel unfinished, and that I was cheating. Panel 2. I didn't make this page a full splash, though. I added in this tall panel because the next beat of dialogue was too much to add to the following page without starting to seriously shift everything back multiple pages. The visual of Kellanaugh in this tighter panel helps solidify the character acting of the line, "I froze," a little better than the tiny drawing of him in panel 1. I used photo reference here again for the fox, but I can see from my file that it was a very small photo that I enlarged so much that it's pixel blurry to the point of being almost non-recognizable. In some role-playing games and video games, characters can pick up a new weapon and use it instantly, as though they have been training with it endlessly. No difference in technique between something small like a dagger or something large like an axe. And that always bothered me. So here, and again in a few pages, I have Kellanaugh point out that getting used to wielding that axe will take time and be very different than swinging his sword. Page 7, Panel 1. I've talked about Kellanaugh and loss in this commentary series, and in this panel it almost seems as though he's lamenting the loss of his sword. Even his faithful weapon has abandoned him. Panel 2. I'm stretching this scene out a bit with the fox not seeing Kellanaugh. In issue 1, I did a similar predator encounter with the Fishers, but Kellanaugh and M only have to wait 2 panels before the danger leaves. For this, I went with bigger panels and had the near miss last over the course of 2 pages. Panel 3. Kellanaugh is on the right of each panel on this page, something I usually try to avoid, though I did make sure he varies in size. Normally I'd stagger left and right placement in a stack of panels like this, but in panel 2, Kellanaugh isn't the focus of the panel. The fox's head is, so the eye trails down still in a zigzag pattern the way I'd want. The fox and background inks are a bit abbreviated here by the use of stippling over them with white correctional fluid. Even though the color holds and final colors are doing most of the heavy lifting for the fog effect, that white stipple certainly adds to it. Page 8, Panel 1. I've seen a few instructional videos about the various techniques for wielding various swords, how some are for slashing and some are for stabbing, and how different movements and goals can be with different swords. So, as I mentioned on the last page, here I wanted Kellanaugh to get some practice with the axe, to see its weight, its balance, and chop, and how that's very different from his usual weapon of a sword. Panel 2. Over-the-shoulder turns with the elbow leading the motion are a go-to of mine for showing surprise. Kellanaugh's little dot eyes certainly help convey that emotion too. The snap sound effect is a font I added in the coloring and lettering stage. I made it semi-transparent to feel at home in the fog. Panel 3. And here is the real reason for the fog. To obscure this figure emerging from it, which Kellanaugh believes to be the fox, or what he can see of the fox's paw. Panel 4. Only to truly be the reveal of Conrad. Conrad's a little beat up and scratched, and as my retcon way of explaining the hook he has in the fall book, his once straight harpoon is now distressed and bent after his tumble in the sea and being washed ashore in the Briar. Page 9, Panel 1. Looking back at this page, I wonder if I should have fog alter the text and balloons to fit better in with the fog. In this panel, it was important for me to not have dialogue recap all that Conrad missed. Only getting Conrad's dialogue, while Kellanaugh's responses are given to the reader through narration, was a trick I picked up from the movie Dr. Zhivago. In a scene where Dr. Zhivago's half-brother visits him, Omar Sharif, playing Zhivago, gives his responses conversationally, while his brother, played by Alec Guinness, is done as narration. And that's rather fitting, with Alec Guinness being half of the namesake of Kellanaugh. Panel 2. The untruthful admission to the reader was also gleaned from Dr. Zhivago, when the brother is asked if he likes Zhivago's poetry, and he lies. In the framing of this panel, it was important to me to have the axe visible as well as Conrad's full face and expression. That meant cropping in on Kellanaugh so that the axe is more of a second character in this panel with Conrad. This panel is meant to echo back to the scene in Winter when Liam asks Kellanaugh the same question. Kellanaugh lies to Conrad, not only about being the Black Axe, but also his entire statement in the next panel, Panel 3. And Kellanaugh's response starting, "I am truly," echoes the same scene in Winter. The lie of his long life being tied to the axe was a way for Kellanaugh to explain away the questions Conrad may have about the axe and the legend surrounding it. He wants to stop those questions before they start. While Kellogg is lying to Conrad, he did not lie to Liam. He avoided and dodged the same topics. But with Conrad, he spins a fib, and rather easily. Perhaps a sign that Kellogg never would have given the axe to the sea mouse. Page 10, panel 1. Conrad readily accepts the explanation and is encouraged that his assistance being given to the actual black axe will only help bolster his own tale and life spoils here on out. As this page progresses, and even into the next page, there is a color phase slowly happening to move from blue-gray fog to pale daylight, which also means that the backgrounds start becoming more and more fully inked and detailed. Panel 2. I'm not a fan of this panel. I wish I'd cropped in tighter on the pair to avoid their size being so close to Conrad in panel 1. Also, Kellogg's head shape and expression are a little odd for me here. But I do like the idea that while agreeing to take help, and therefore the promise of Conrad getting Black Axe bragging rights, Kellogg is given a dash of hope due to Conrad assuming that they will make it home yet, despite their situation of being shipwrecked on an island of ferrets and about to hunt a fox. Panel 3. The color shift is more obvious here and therefore has lifted the fog enough for Kellogg to have found Prince. This panel starts an 18-panel dialogue-free run, which is especially odd since Kellogg isn't alone any longer. And that dialogue-free run ends with a scream. Page 11, panels 1 through 3. I wanted to slow down the hunting tracks here over the course of the 3 small panels to adjust the tension, but also to help the color transition more. Panel 4, so that when the fox appears, it's fully the correct color. This panel also could have been a full page for impact, but I liked having the setup panels before it led into this moment. Looking at my rough layouts, it doesn't appear I used reference for this fox, and I think it kind of shows, unfortunately. Page 12, panel 1. I didn't use much photo reference for the fox on most of the rest of this sequence of pages, because of the specific acting I needed the fox to do, chomping at branches, mouth agape at certain angles, etc. I remember the tiny scurrying mice in this panel being fun to draw. Panel 2. This entire sequence is very linear. In panel 1, the mice are at the bottom of the branch. Here in panel 2, they are a little way up it when the fox bites at where they were in the last panel. Then in panel 3, the fox rises up, where their retreat route is now cut off from the bite in the last panel. Sometimes I'll collage together a patchwork of moments that don't really dovetail together, but ultimately they still tell a scene. These fox battle pages are much more like storyboards for an action scene in a film. Each action of a panel leads into the next. Page 13, panel 1. I'm still proud of the balance in this panel. Not only the physics type of balance with the feeling of gravity of Conrad barely holding on and the weight of Kellogg's feet as he swings the axe, but also the visual balances of the curve of Conrad's tail and the hook line, or of the bottom beak point of the axe peeking in the right side of the panel, while Kellogg's cloak forms the same shape peeking in from the right, and how the angle of the branch leads right into panel 2. While having Kellogg finally get used to the axe in this impossible battle, it was important for me that he not succeed at first, that his hits to the fox be clumsy and full of potential self-harm as well. Panel 3. This impact panel would have been easier if I had the space of a vertical panel to show the full drop. But I made up for it by really showing the ground cover snapping and flying up. If Kellogg's ribs weren't broken, as he said after the shipwreck, they must be now. Panel 4. Getting the reverse angle of the fox shows the wound it just received on its muzzle as it stalks the unmoving body of Kellogg. Page 14, panel 1. Kellogg's narration certainly isn't very charitable to Conrad, but keep in mind, technically he writes it all long after the fact, after the events at the climax of the book in chapter 6. Seeing an opportunity, in swings Conrad, leg leading his leap, for a storytelling reason. Panel 2, and that leading leg goes right into the jaws of the fox. I bet you originally thought this was how Conrad was going to lose his leg, but in 2 pages, I have a twist. I didn't use photo reference for this panel, but I do remember looking at my dog Autumn's mouth and teeth to get the look right. Panel 3. Conrad swings that hook into the fox's lower lip. Was it for stability, to raise himself up and take his weight off of the wounded leg, or was it to get a blow in on the fox, hoping it would let go? Page 15, panel 1. Ultimately, it leads to a tense stalemate, where Kellogg can act. Panel 2. This is an animations type panel where I'm showing every moment of a character's movement. I did this in winter when Liam is tumbling off the owl's back, and I liked showing Kellogg's journey to strike the blow here in one panel instead of taking several smaller ones. Panel 3. As Kellogg leaps for what the reader hopes will be the axe hit that kills the fox, I want to draw attention to the detail that I still remembered to draw, the cuts in Kellogg's cloak from all the thorns. Page 16, panel 1. Ouch! Breaking the silence with that scream of Conrad's, as it's not the fox, but rather Kellogg being responsible for removing Conrad's leg. I had to be very careful about how to draw this, so that the severing was clear, but not grotesque. At the start of the commentary for issue 1, I mentioned alternative plots for Conrad and his involvement. I also had various other ways Conrad could have lost his leg. One idea was in the shipwreck. Another was by the fox, or by one of Luthabin's ferrets, or Luthabin himself. Conrad stealing the axe and having a misswing or having it used against him by a ferret were also in the running. But the more personal story that drove more character turmoil was for Kellogg to have done it. Panel 2. Likewise, I had to be careful as the two plummet into the thick bramble of how to depict the open wound, and a less is more approach with red color did the trick. Panel 3. Their falling lines are tinted roughly the same colors as their cloaks. Page 17, panels 1 through 3. I'd thought about this series of events since early in the process of writing The Black Axe, that Conrad's wound would need to be treated quickly, somewhere in the field. The belt and cloak bandage were things I had planned on, but using the stick to bite down on in panel 2 was something I added as I drew this page. I also thought it was important to show Kellogg lack a skill when it comes to him being a guard mouse. He has no training as a healer, and he's just making do. His dot eyes also help tell that story, as well as the narration. Panel 4. I still love this image of the fox. In the rough pencils, I drew the fox and then suggested a few line squiggles here and there to represent where I'd ink in the briar tangle. Note the hook is still attached to its lip throughout the rest of the scene. Page 18. The ultimate undoing of the fox here on this page was inspired by the Brer Rabbit story, where the hero animal was small enough to move in the tangle, but the larger predators could not pursue or else be tangled and shredded by thorns. Like the previous page's fox pencils, I drew 3 foxes for this page and then just scribbled some lines over top to let myself know how thick the briar net had gotten around the fox. In the last panel, I like how Kellogg is just sitting there, waiting. Page 19. I won the Spectrum Award in 2013 for this page. It's also the only page I still own from any issue of Black Axe. I got a little overzealous selling originals when this book was coming out, and before I'd even submitted the page to Spectrum for that award, I decided to keep this one as the most fitting page I could to sum up my experience on this book. Panel 1 has my favorite of all the fox drawings I did for this book. In panel 2, the blood splat was made to resemble an exclamation point. Showing the impact with the axe was always a struggle not to be too gory, so showing it almost as the moment before and then the moment after was my solution to not go too far visually with such a destructive weapon. In the open background spaces in panels 1 and 3, I decided when coloring them that they felt too vacant, and I digitally painted in some faraway briar branches. Page 20, panel 1. Kellogg mentions dirty work in Collection of the Proof. This is probably one of the most gory things I have ever put in a mouse guard story, and I did it in such a way that I only hint at it with the shape of this makeshift sack of Kellogg and Conrad's garments tied together. And then I do it again in a few pages, with part of Kellogg's cloak going towards Conrad's bandage and the other half going into this proof sack. Kellogg no longer has a guard cloak. Panel 2. Not only am I switching up the scale of the mice in each panel on this page and shifting them to different placements in each panel, I also flip which mouse is right and left of each other to help add that visual rhythm and keep panels from getting stale. Panel 3. I didn't have this scene with the fox kits planned when I wrote the line here that's a callback from issue 1. I don't think I did a good enough job making the lighting around these fox kits convincing that they'd be in silhouette, but I hesitate to ever recolor this for future reprintings. Page 21, panel 1. This sad moment was important for me to convey. In animal stories, it's easy to paint with a wide brush and label some animals villains because they are predators of the animals we, as readers, are following. But that can be translated into a metaphor that you are born into a role of good or evil and have no choice in the matter, simply because of your species. I wanted to make the emotions the reader was feeling more complex than the black and white of predator versus prey. Panel 2. Kellinaw understands this instantly, and that he'd hunted the fox not for his own needs or survival, but to recover an axe, and as a favor for another animal. He has regrets as he stares at that axe, that life was less precious than an object. Panel 3. While Conrad verbalizes an unsavory opinion about the ease of slaying the young, Kellinaw makes it clear he's not in this for any bloodlust. I'm sure he knows that Luthien would be furious with him for not killing these two, but he wants no part of it. Conrad being ready to slay them should be another signal to Kellinaw that the one-legged mouse has all the wrong instincts to be the wielder of that axe. Page 22, panel 1. The close-up of the foxes was supposed to be the most tender image of them, the one that pulls on the reader's heartstrings the most. But looking back, I think every other drawing of them does that a bit better than this one. Panel 2. We've been leading up to this moment for a while. Speaking to beasts is something that Kellinaw had the unique skill of, showcased especially in the Winter book. And at the start of Black Axe, he still doesn't have that skill yet. He's inspired by M's crow speech, and here, for the first time, Kellinaw talks to another beast. Panel 3. I explored Kellinaw's desire to speak to animals going back to his childhood when I did the Free Comic Book Day story, Piper the Listener. So, did it work? Did Kellinaw speaking in a different font and with different word balloon treatments translate to these kits? I'd like to think they understood, and both lived to be old foxes. Page 23, panel 1. The final color change for this issue. Sunset, again leading into the richer saturation and darkness of Ilder Hall's interior. Panel 2. Slung over his back in panel 1 and now delivered in this panel is that gory detail I mentioned a few pages back. The orb of your enemy's gaze is the fox's eyeball, which means that with that axe alone, Kellinaw went about butchering the fox in such a way as to remove that trophy, still a whole and round object. But I always kept it wrapped in the combined cloaks of Kellinaw and Conrad to avoid the tone of Mouseguard going too dark. Panel 3. I was worried about how to explain Conrad's sudden appearance as I approached this scene. Should I leave him outside? But realizing I could make it a point of confusion over Luthien's expression worked perfectly. Panel 4. Note that yellow cloth hanging from Luthien's belt. That is the headpiece worn by the slain ferret Eber Oker, who we will meet in the next issue via flashback. And just as things look up a bit for Kellinaw, he's dispatched a fox, reunited with Conrad, won the axe, and held up his bargain with Luthien. The issue ends with the reveal of M's death. That returning theme for him of solitude and loss. On a lighter note, it also meant that until I had to draw the cutaway for the hardcover extras, I was finally able to put the Ilder Hall model up on the model shelf and give it a rest. Pinup by Charles Paul Wilson III. I believe originally Joe Mad had agreed to do a pinup for Black Axe, and for some reason he was unable to meet the deadline. So, in a rush, I reached out to an artist who was a natural choice, Charles Paul Wilson III. He'd been illustrating The Stuff of Legend, an all-ages comic series that also happened to be a square format book and was very much thematically relative to Mouseguard. I met Charles at a few cons, so I reached out, and he was wonderfully agreeable to do the pinup on short notice. His take was to present the Black Axe saga as a stage play, with other mice dressed as fish and crows, while below in the pit, the orchestra plays something triumphant. The original is ink and watercolor, and I'm proud to have it in my collection. Charles also contributed a story in Legends of the Guard Volume 2, titled When Moles Are Around. And that's the 4th issue of Mouseguard the Black Axe. It has been collected in a hardcover, published by Archaea. If you've enjoyed this commentary, please leave comments in the section below, let me know what I didn't answer for you in this issue, and subscribe for updates when I add more Mouseguard commentary. Thank you for listening.